We've long had the debate of whether spirits and ghosts are real, and depending on your side of the culture, be it Eastern or Western, can greatly influence your opinion on this debate. Those raised in Western culture tend to rely on logic to explain supernatural occurrences, whereas those from Eastern culture are generally more superstitious. And with the advancement of technologies these days, such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and microwave, just to name a few, each of these operating in different frequencies that we cannot see, the existence of supernatural beings may be more plausible than we thought, but we, the masses, simply can't see them. There are millions, if not billions of ghost stories out there, and I'm going to be bringing you some of the scariest. I heard this when I was in Korea. One day, a girl was walking home late at night after work. It was dark, around midnight. She lived in an apartment where they had an elevator. She got in the elevator, and when the door was about to close, a strange man with a very red hoodie entered the elevator with her. He apologized for scaring her and asked which floor she is heading to without making any eye contact. She told him out of fear, and the man casually pressed the button and the one below. As they were on their way, he asked her for her cell phone and if he could use it, but she declined out of suspicion and isolated herself in the corner. After seconds of silence, the elevator arrived to the floor below the one the girl was heading to, and the door opened. The guy slowly walked out of the door and turned around facing toward the elevator and the girl, and then just stared at her without any movement. Slowly, the door started to close, and from the gap, she could see him turning around and heading up the stairs, pulling a knife out of his pocket. As he proceeded up the stairs, he faded into smoke. Two days after my grandfather died, the neighborhood security guard knocks on our door on a Sunday morning. He told us, "An old man came to your house earlier, knocked on your front door for about half an hour, and finally left." When I asked him what he wanted, he told me he needed to say goodbye to someone he had never had the chance to meet. We were all stunned and had no idea who this old man was or who he was looking for. When the guard came in, he shouted, "That's the old man!" pointing at a picture of my grandfather. My entire family froze for a minute. I'm not 100% sure if the guard was telling the truth, but I almost like believing that my granddad wanted to say goodbye to my newborn sister before resting in peace. When my family hit hard times, we had to move into a small house where our uncle had recently shot and killed himself. He had done this because of his depression after his wife had overdosed on pills and died the summer before. It all happened so quickly that when we moved in, there was still a bit of blood in one of the rooms. But on the third or fourth night living there, my sister and I, who were sharing a room in the tiny house, were awake in our room playing video games at around 1 to 2 in the morning when someone knocks at our door. We didn't think anything of it and shouted for whoever was outside our door to come in. No answer. Another knock. We stop and stare at the door, and another knock comes. The doorknob does a full rotation and snaps back as if someone turned it and let it go very quickly. I get up and open the door, expecting to see one of my other sisters or my mother, the only other people in the house. I opened the door and stared into an empty hallway. I walked down the hall and peeked into the other bedroom. My two younger sisters and my mother are both fast asleep. This might have been a dream, but I testify to this day that what I saw was a ghost. So here I am, a young boy who awoke in the middle of the night. I'm currently sharing a bunk bed with my brother, and I'm on the top bunk. I look out into the living room and noticed everything is dark. However, there's a person in an evening gown dusting my fireplace mantle, The woman was slender, which threw me off guard because Mum is obese. I yelled out, "Mum?" The person turned around. It was not my mum, but instead some older woman. Suddenly she shrieks and her face becomes severely deformed. It was like that shit you see in horror movies, like ridiculously scary, especially for a young kid. I blinked my eyes and she was gone. I somehow went back to bed, and the next morning I went to my living room and noticed that even though the TV was off, there was something written on the screen. It said, "Don't be afraid." The text slowly faded and no one else saw it. As a young boy, this was, and still is, extremely terrifying. When I was about 4 years old, I remember making a friend named Ali. Ali was someone I met one day in the neighbourhood, so she would often come over and I would play hide and seek with her. She was a year older than me, but that didn't bother me. She would also joke around saying that we had the same mother, but even at a young age, I could tell that was a joke and that she idolised my mum by the way she used to stare at her every time my mum came to check on me, which she often did. The first time I told my mum about Ali, she got angry and told me to stop, so I never brought it up again, but I made sure that when we did play, it was somewhere close by so my mum could keep watch over me. I just assumed she didn't want to know about my friend, but was okay with us playing at least. Well, one night, we were outside playing quite late when Ali told me she had to leave, for good. I never heard from her again. Fast forward to when I was 16. I've completely forgotten about Ali at this point. But in casual conversation one day with some of Mum's friends that I happened to be at the table with, Mum told us that before I was born, I had a sister named Ali, and she passed away due to complications. She barely lived to be more than 3 months old. I have 4 little cousins who never got to meet my grandfather. He passed before they were born. One morning, they ran downstairs for breakfast as they usually do. As my uncle was getting their food ready, one pointed to the fridge and said, "That's him!" My uncle, not thinking much of it, said, "Who?" and looked over. They were pointing at the picture of my granddad that they never got to meet. My cousin responded, "That man comes and talks to us every night until we fall asleep. What's his name?" I worked night shift as palliative care in a very big, very old nursing home. It's important to note that this home and the religious organisation that ran it are currently part of the Royal Inquiry into the institutional response to the abuse of children. The nurses that had worked there for 30 plus years used to delight in telling younger staff that when it was used as a children's home, they used to bury children that died in the rose garden. This old rose garden was apparently under a newer wing of the home. At least 4 times in my 2 years of working there, we would have elderly, close-to-death patients wake, totally lucid in the dead of night, and ask us to please tell the little girl to get out of my room, or please get that little boy out of the corner. He's looking at me. Being in this huge, dark, old creepy building that had a very awful history, and then that happening? Fuck that. I would never do rounds alone when it happened. It was terrifying. It made my blood run cold, and I'd get a friend to work with me the rest of the night. I wasn't the only person this happened to either. It was a regular occurrence. When I was in high school, my family had to move from Central Texas back to West Texas for my dad's job. We were under a lot of stress and other family issues at the time as well, but that's besides the point. My sister and my mum were painting the upstairs wall as we got the house to get ready. My mum was on the wall to the far right. There was a blank wall in the middle, and my sister was on the far left. I was downstairs packing up things into boxes. Suddenly, my sister comes downstairs, looking scared out of her mind. Now mind you, she's older than me. She asked me to come upstairs, and on the wall in between them, for no apparent reason, this writing appeared. Looking closely enough, you can see it wasn't written by accident, but rather by broad strokes, made by a human hand. Problem is, the handprint is too big for any of us three to make. The longer we stayed in the room, the more freaked out we got as we realized that nobody was playing a prank on anyone else. I still have no explanation to this day what it means. A few years ago, my brother would get a call on his cell phone around 2 to 3 a.m. every morning. He would answer it, and it was this hellish sounding noise, like static mixed with screams. He changed his cell number after a month of this, and it stopped. Then after a week or so it began again, the exact same noise, the exact same time. Finally one day, he decided to backdial the call. It was an old man that had no clue what he was talking about, but still the calls persisted. If he didn't answer, it would call a few more times until he eventually answered. No messages were ever left. So eventually he got fed up. He ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and then got a new number. And you guessed it, the screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time, he was terrified every morning. Unsure why this was happening, he backdialed the number again and always got a different person. Around this time, he lost his job, which meant he couldn't afford his phone bills anymore, so he lost that too. The call stopped, of course. His phone was disconnected now. So one day, my mum asks me to listen to this weird message she got on our home phone answering machine. It was the fucking static screaming. We showed my brother and he was freaking out. He backdialed the number again, and it said that the number was disconnected this time. We never heard from it again after that. When my sister was young, my parents got her a personal phone, a landline so that she could feel special because she was extra spoiled. It was a prepaid line, so basically no one could call in or out if she ran out of credit, much like a mobile phone. Anyway, every night at 3 a.m, her phone would ring. She said there was a man on the other line, and she would get really scared and always come running into my room. It actually escalated to the point that I asked her to disconnect her phone before going to sleep because it was becoming so fucking annoying to get woken up every single night by this person that called her. To be honest, since she was about 10, I thought it was just these stupid scary movies she liked to watch and it was giving her nightmares. Eventually she just got rid of the phone though. In any case, I recall this stopping. A few years ago we were talking about it, and she confessed that her phone continued to ring even after she disconnected it, which is why she said she didn't want it anymore. A few weeks ago, my girlfriend and I were sleeping together when I woke up to her asking, "What are you doing?" She sometimes talked in her sleep, but this sounded so coherent and urgent that it jolted me awake, and I asked her what she was talking about. She then woke up and said she thought she saw someone at the end of the bed. Thinking it was just a dream or a semi-awake hallucination, we thought nothing of it and went back to sleep. About an hour later, I woke up and saw someone standing on the bed with the sheets wrapped up and twisted to their neck. I didn't know what to do, but the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "What are you doing?" My girlfriend then woke me up. I had been dreaming the exact same thing she did, and said the exact same thing. When my friend and his little brother were younger, they shared a bedroom. They're some years apart, but his younger brother was born with a multitude of different health issues, including multiple sclerosis, and is confined to a wheelchair and cannot care for himself. So to keep an eye on him overnight when his parents couldn't, they shared a bedroom. One night, my friend randomly woke up for no particular reason and happened to glance over at his younger brother, but noticed something very startling. A strange silhouette of a man wearing a top hat looking in through the window behind his younger brother's crib. The first thing my friend did was jump up and turn the light on, then ran into his parents' room to tell them what he saw. When his parents came back into their room to investigate, his younger brother was having a seizure in the crib. A few of his family members say that it was his younger brother's guardian angel standing in the window that night. My friend believes it was death. My friend and a few of his college buddies were going on a ghost hunt after hearing about some graveyard where children were murdered by their mother and buried. The graveyard was located off the main road, so my friend parked his car on the side of the road, and the group of about 5 to 7 of them got out and followed the small path through the woods for a couple of minutes to get to the graveyard. Once there, nothing exciting happened for the first 10 minutes or so, and they had tried everything the website or wherever they heard the story from told them to do, with nothing resulting. They got bored, and being typical inebriated college kids, started taunting the supposed ghost of the mother. This continued on for a few minutes before they got tired and decided to go back to the car as one of the girls had to go to the bathroom. Once they got back to the car, my friend, the sober driver, tried opening the handle without unlocking the car because he hadn't locked it in the first place, but found it locked. He attributed this to bad memory at the time. The group drove home, laughing and talking like normal. After he dropped off all the others off to their homes, he then went back to his own house. He got in at the same time as one of his roommates, who stopped and waited for him to pull in. The roommate had his phone out and shined the light in the window when his friend pulled in as a joke. What he saw was tiny baby-sized handprints all over the windows. As soon as my friend got out, he went into the house without saying a word to the roommate. The roommate, confused, went back to the car and tried to run one of the handprints out. They were inside of the window. My best friend died of cancer in 2002. We were very close in every way and we spent the majority of our free time together. Almost a year after she died, I was in my apartment sleeping and my phone rang at about 3 AM. For reference, I had a Sony Ericsson T610. I was very groggy, but I picked up the phone from my nightstand and looked at it. I saw it was my friend's number. I immediately became alert and awake and answered my phone very cautiously. I said hello a few times, but all I could hear was a very loud static for about 30 seconds. Eventually, the call ended. At this point I was freaking out and called the number back, only to get an automated recording that this number was out of service. I then called her mother's house to see if possibly her older sister may have had my friend's old phone and might have called me by accident, but there was no answer at my friend's mother's home. I came to find out that the remaining family was away in Miami. After they came home a few days later, I took the phone to them and showed them the call log, and they were in disbelief. They went to my friend's room and got the phone out of the drawer where it had been sitting for months. Battery stone cold dead. In 2005, my dad went on vacation and ended up at a bed and breakfast. While checking in, the owner tells him that the room next to his is undergoing some repairs, so not to open the door or anything. My dad goes to his room, drops off his things, but then was bored. He pokes around the house a little, but with nothing else to do, decides to see the room that needs repairing. He tries the door, but it's locked. He wonders why the owner would even bother warning him about this room since it's locked anyway. But he peeks through the keyhole and sees that the room beyond isn't actually being repaired. It's completely empty, except for a figure in the far side of the room, sitting in a chair, facing the wall. My dad stands up again, creeped out. Just to make sure he wasn't imagining things, he bends down and looks through the keyhole again. This time, he doesn't see the figure or the room at all, just the colour red, like someone was blocking the keyhole with construction paper. Weirded out, my dad went to bed. When he was at breakfast with the owner the next morning, my dad asked him about the repairs in the next room. The owner sighs and says, "Truthfully, I don't rent out that room because so many people have told me it's haunted by a ghost with red eyes." There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had gone, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. When he approached, he found the door slightly open. He peeked inside, but couldn't see any lights on. He knocked, but there was no answer, so he decided to turn on his torch and walk inside. There was nobody here. So the hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around, he was surprised to see that the walls were covered in many portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable, feeling like he was being watched. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a deep, restless sleep. Face down in an unfamiliar bed, he turned blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows.